You're watching Captains of Industry. I'm speaking to Mike Brown, the CEO of Nedbank. You've got a big green underpin, obviously, given the colour to the bank, but environmental issues are obviously at the centre of the Nedbank strategy. How do you define your strategy in that space?
Yeah, so certainly we are the green bank, and really what we try to do is make sure that we are sustainable in everything that we do. So in the first instance, our strategy is about making sure that internally in our own operations, we optimize all of our carbon footprint and all of the issues to do with greenness in our own footprint. So we track and monitor all of that. Once we've optimized our base, we have been the only bank in Africa now to take our remaining carbon footprint and offset that with the purchase of carbon credits out of a project that we were financing in Africa. So in some ways it's all about optimizing your own house, and then clearly if you have a leadership position in optimizing your own house, that gives you the credibility to be able to speak about these matters at an industry level or on a broader platform.
Mike, you spoke about how important staff are to the overall strategy. Now, as you pointed out, you've been with the group since 1993, obviously in different guises. But how has Nedbank managed to hang on to your talent? Why have you never looked further afield?
So I think, in many ways, it's the people that you come to work with every day. I've been remarkably fortunate in my career to have always worked with or for people who've stretched and inspired me. So I've thoroughly enjoyed coming to work every day. And the wonderful thing about working in an organization like Nedbank or a large bank is that you can actually have many, many careers within one organization. So I've been extremely fortunate to work in structured finance, private equity, commercial banking, property finance. I then moved across to the center to be the finance director and then the chief executive. So I've just been stretched every day coming to work, and I also thoroughly enjoy the people that I work with.
Staying with people, what kind of people do you like to surround yourself with?
I think what you need in any organization is people with high levels of IQ and EQ. So particularly in a complex banking environment, you need people who are absolutely experienced, understand what they're doing, team players, people who are more interested in what they're doing for the overall organization than just for their little piece of that organization. But then you need people who have the EQ to be able to get on with each other in a way that promotes the whole.
Have you solidified your executive team, or are we going to see changes down the line on that front?
Yeah, we've had a very stable executive team now for the last 2 to 3 years. I think in any team, you do always run the risk of losing 1 or 2 people from time to time. That would always be unfortunate, but I think we've got a very stable environment at an exco level. And in fact, if you look one level down in the organization, we've also had a very stable environment. Our current staff turnover across the business is running at around 6%, which is extremely low, and it's probably even less than that at executive level.
How do you see yourself as a leader? If you had to describe yourself in one sentence, what would that be?
It's always quite hard to do in one sentence, but I think I'm certainly energized and engaged and motivated about how I can build a better Nedbank. My goal as the chief executive is to make sure, I think I might have said this to you last time, I leave behind a sustainably better organization than the one that I inherited.
How do you manage your time? This is another question that I ask all of the captains who sit in that hot seat, and I get a variance of answers across the board. We're interested to find out a little bit more about that diary management.
Look, I'm sure if you ask my wife, she'd say it quite badly. But I think in the first instance, you've got to realize that in any of these roles, it's a 12-hour day plus job. And that's what you sign up for. And certainly, that's the game that we're in. But within that...
12-hour day job, 5 days a week or 7 days a week? Crucial question.
Probably 6.5 or something like that. Mobile technology.
Now we really feel sorry for your wife.
Mobile technology has certainly made things much easier. So you can, on weekends work from home, keep up to speed with reading, etc. But I certainly try as best as I can to manage diaries, to try and make sure that you only do the important stuff, because you can get dragged into an enormous amount of issues that would just consume time, but they're not really the key issues. And then, over weekends to try and make sure you do have quality time with wife and kids.
You've got 3 children. Do you plan family holidays? I'm still batting for the family part of this equation.
Yeah, so we certainly do plan family holidays. We have wonderful family holidays together. It's an enormous privilege to be able to do that. And that's all about diary management. Right up early in the beginning of the year, you carve out exactly when you're going to do that and make sure that work kind of operates around those times.
How do you deal with April when we're talking about holidays? Because pretty much the South African environment shuts down across the board in April. There are holidays everywhere you look. Do you take advantage of April? Do you encourage your staff to take advantage of April?
Yeah, so certainly we do take advantage of April as a family, and we've gone away every April for the last few years. In many ways, April is quite a difficult month because sometimes Easter's in it and sometimes Easter's out of April. But from a staff perspective, we always encourage our staff to have a balance between their home and their work life, and that does include making sure that you take appropriate time to be with your family and friends.
With Kuseni Dlamini's departure from Old Mutual in the emerging market space, Rolf Mapita's taken over. Do you and Rolf work closely together?
Yeah, so certainly Rolf and I work very well and closely together. We have regular meetings, and I think he's a really good guy and he'll do a great job at Old Mutual.
Where do you want to take Nedbank now? Although you've done very well over the last 3 years and, as I said, achieved success and stability within the South African space, do you want to challenge the bigger of the big four and perhaps ultimately come out on top?
So certainly for us, this is never a game of size. So we're not trying to have a bigger market cap or a bigger market share than anybody else. What we really focused on is making sure that we provide our nearly 6 million customers with better service than any of the other South African banks can do. And if we continue to do that, we will continue to build and grow our franchise sustainably over the long term. And what we also are in a position to do, I think, if we manage correctly our alliance relationship with EcoBank in Central and West Africa, and we manage correctly our organic expansion in South and East Africa, is to effectively build Africa's most admired bank with the largest Pan-African banking footprint for the benefit of our customers.
You spoke about the challenge of the global environment, the uncertainty a little earlier. What happens if we go through another downturn? Are you ready to navigate through that?
I think we're in great shape to navigate a downturn. If you look at our business, we came through the last downturn in 2008 and 9 in good shape. In fact, if you look back at the South African industry, really what the downturn meant at its worst was about minus 30% in earnings terms. Everybody continued to make a profit. Earnings might have gone backwards. Everybody remained above regulatory capital levels and no one was required to be bailed out. If you look at the health of our industry today, it's in fact significantly stronger than it was in the previous crisis. Our capital levels then were around 8%, they're now around 11%. So we're much more resilient to deal with any crisis.
The rand is one of the most volatile emerging market currencies, driven largely by risk on, risk off in the international environment. Is it something that you watch closely? We're tracking at about 8.70 to the dollar at the moment. And there's the possibility that we could see a quick retracement from here, where we go through that 9 level, 950s next, target 10, and who knows where from there.
So certainly if you look at our business, there's very little direct effect of a weakening rand on our business per se, because we're primarily a domestic focused business. It's really the indirect effects of a weakening rand that would worry us. So certainly what we watch for is we know that we've had some pretty nasty trade data recently, trade deficits. That's going to feed into a larger current account deficit.
That's the biggest risk, is the current account deficit.
Exactly, and our ability to continue to finance that through bond portfolio flows essentially. So if that unwound, I think what you would see, as you say, is a deterioration or weakening in the rand, which would lead to higher inflation and therefore higher interest rates. And that's really the knock-on effect into our business, would be through the transmission mechanism into interest rates.
Labour unrest, looking at what has unfolded in the South African environment over the last couple of months, it's been a heated environment. Is it something that concerns you?
Yeah, certainly it does. In many ways what we've seen is a breakdown of the rule of law. We've seen some real challenges around the labour relations environment in our country, and indeed collective bargaining in general. So certainly that has a very negative effect on South Africa reputationally, internationally, and it's likely to have a negative effect on growth because generally those mining companies are a large contributor towards exports. Certainly, I think that our leadership have taken note of that. We've been in difficult situations as a country before, and I have no doubt that we will do the right things to rectify it.
Do you think we're going to see more trouble ahead of Mangaung, everybody moving to that December period?
Yeah, I think it'll always be a difficult period leading up to an election in our particular political circumstance, but I really do hope and pray that the worst of the trouble is behind us.
Also on the horizon, January 2013, and that brings with it the World Economic Forum in Davos. Will you be there?
Yes, I'll be there.
What are you looking for this time around in the discussions that we'll see among global CEOs in Switzerland?
So I think the interesting thing about Davos is obviously it gives you an opportunity to attend a number of subject-related discussions, but often what's more interesting than the subject-related discussions is to try and pick up the mood from an economic perspective. So I think, clearly what people will be very focused on in Davos will be the mood around Europe, because right now that's the epicenter of the challenges in the global economy. But I think what's going to be even more interesting in Davos this year is the debate around what America has done in terms of the fiscal cliff, because that will be right front of mind in early January.
And time for just one last question. You spoke about your legacy and what you hope your legacy will be a little earlier in the conversation. Perhaps again, if you can just summarize that for me so we end on a high point.
I think it's quite simply to leave behind a sustainably better Nedbank than the one I inherited.
Mike, thanks so much for your time. Mike Brown is the CEO of Nedbank.